The champagne bubbles rose in my glass like tiny prayers I didn't believe in anymore. 32 years old, divorced for exactly 3 months, and standing in a penthouse ballroom where everyone seemed to know the rules except me. The New Year's Eve party hummed with the kind of effortless sophistication I'd tried to cultivate during my marriage to Gerald, that carefully curated veneer that never quite took. "Diana, you're doing it again," Charlotte murmured beside me, her silver dress catching the light from the crystal chandeliers overhead. "That face! What face?" I took another sip, the champagne tart against my tongue. "The one that says you'd rather be home with a book and a cat, except you don't have a cat because Gerald was allergic." Madeline appeared on my other side, her auburn hair swept up in an elaborate twist I could never manage. "We brought you here to have fun, remember? To celebrate freedom." Freedom. The word tasted strange, like something I'd ordered off a menu without checking the price first. 3 months since Gerald had signed the papers. 8 years since I'd walked down an aisle toward a man I thought I knew. 29 days since I'd moved into my own apartment with furniture that didn't match and dishes I'd bought at a discount store. "I am having fun," I protested weakly, gesturing with my glass toward the crowd of beautiful people doing beautiful things. "Look at me. I'm here. I'm wearing a dress that cost more than my car payment. I'm practically radiating joie de vivre." Charlotte snorted, a sound that would have horrified her corporate lawyer persona. "You're radiating. Please let this night end so I can go home and overthink my life choices." Different vibe. She wasn't wrong. The dress, a deep emerald silk that Madeline had insisted brought out my eyes, felt like a costume. Like I was playing at being the kind of woman who belonged at parties like this, in penthouses that overlooked the city like kingdoms waiting to be claimed. "Okay, intervention time." Madeline grabbed my champagne glass and handed it to a passing waiter, replacing it with something that looked considerably stronger. "You've spent 8 years being the perfect wife to a man who spent those same 8 years making you feel small. Tonight, you're going to do something reckless." "I don't do reckless," I said automatically, then winced at how prim I sounded. "I do sensible. I do well planned. I do boring," Charlotte finished, not unkindly. "You do boring, sweetie, which is why we're going to play a game." I eyed them both suspiciously. Charlotte and Madeline had been my friends since college, back when I'd been a different version of myself, one who laughed more easily and took chances without calculating the odds first. They'd watched Gerald slowly sand away those edges over 8 years of marriage, never saying anything but never quite hiding their relief when I'd finally left. "What kind of game?" I asked, already knowing I'd regret the question. Madeline's smile was pure mischief. "See that man over there, by the window?" I followed her gaze across the crowded room to where a figure stood in profile, surveying the party with the detached interest of someone watching a particularly dull documentary. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a black suit that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe, he held himself with the kind of stillness that made everyone else seem frantic by comparison. "The one who looks like he's planning a murder?" I asked. "The one who looks like Sex in a Suit," Madeline corrected. Nikolai Reed. Made his fortune in import-export or real estate, or something equally vague and probably nefarious. Point is, he's gorgeous, he's powerful, and according to every woman who's tried, he's completely untouchable. Emphasis on tried, Charlotte added. Apparently, he's turned down everyone from socialites to supermodels. Some people say he's asexual. Others say he's just impossibly selective. Either way, he's become something of a legend. I studied him more carefully. Mid-40s, if I had to guess, with dark hair silvering at the temples, and a face that was more interesting than handsome. All sharp angles and controlled strength. He hadn't moved from his position by the window, hadn't engaged with anyone around him, seemed content to exist in his own separate universe. "He looks miserable," I observed. "He looks hot," Madeline countered. "And here's your challenge. Kiss him." I choked on my drink. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Kiss the coldest man at the party. Walk right up to him and plant one on those disapproving lips of his. Prove you're not the woman Gerald tried to make you, the one too scared to take a chance." "That's insane," I said. But even as I protested, something flickered in my chest. A small, reckless spark that Gerald had spent 8 years trying to extinguish. "I can't just kiss a stranger." "Why not?" Charlotte challenged. "It's New Year's Eve. People kiss strangers all the time. And you're newly single, newly free, and in desperate need of a story that doesn't involve crying into your wine while watching rom-coms." "I don't cry into my wine," I muttered, even though I absolutely had, just last Tuesday. $100 says you won't do it," Madeline said, her eyes gleaming with challenge. $200 says she chickens out before she gets within 10 feet of him, Charlotte added. Something in me, the part that Gerald had tried to kill with criticism, disguised as concern and love measured in control, stirred to life. Maybe it was the champagne, or maybe it was 3 months of freedom finally starting to metabolize in my system. But I found myself straightening my shoulders and setting down my glass with more force than necessary. "You're on," I heard myself say. "Both of you." Their expressions shifted from amused to slightly alarmed. "Wait, you're serious?" Madeline asked. $300 total, right? That'll cover next month's electric bill and maybe a new pair of shoes." I smoothed down the emerald silk, took a deep breath, and started across the room before I could change my mind. My heart hammered against my ribs as I navigated through clusters of conversations, past couples already practicing their midnight kisses, around waiters carrying trays of champagne that suddenly seemed like very good ideas. With each step, my courage wavered. What was I doing? I didn't kiss strangers. I barely kissed my husband toward the end. Those perfunctory pecks that felt more like obligations than affection. But I was tired of being careful. Tired of being the woman who calculated every risk and still ended up alone in a discount furniture apartment. Tired of looking at myself in the mirror and seeing Gerald's disappointment reflected back. Nikolai Reed still hadn't moved, though his eyes tracked the room with unsettling precision. As I got closer, I realized he was even more imposing than he'd appeared from across the room. Easily 6'3", with a presence that seemed to create its own gravity. The kind of man who made you want to stand up straighter, speak more carefully, be more interesting than you actually were. I was 10 feet away when those eyes, pale gray in the chandelier light, fixed on me. Not with interest exactly, but with the kind of assessment that made me feel simultaneously transparent and utterly insignificant. The look said he'd cataloged everything about me in 3 seconds and found it all perfectly ordinary. 5 feet. My steps didn't falter, but my brain was screaming at me to turn around, to laugh it off, to go collect my friends and leave before I made a complete fool of myself. But something else, something stubborn and reckless, and so unlike the Diana that Gerald had created, pushed me forward. 3 feet. He straightened slightly, that microscopic shift the only indication he'd registered my approach. His expression remained perfectly neutral, perfectly controlled, perfectly cold. "Can I help you?" His voice was deep, with a faint accent I couldn't quite place. Russian, perhaps, or Eastern European, softened by years but not erased. "Probably not," I said, and then I kissed him. I'd meant it to be quick, a brush of lips to win the bet and prove a point to myself more than anyone else. But the moment my mouth touched his, something shifted. He didn't pull away. Didn't respond exactly, but didn't retreat. For 3 heartbeats, we stood frozen in that strange liminal space, my lips against his absolute stillness the only response. Then his hand came up, not to push me away but to cup the back of my neck, his palm warm against my skin, The kiss deepened, his mouth opening against mine with a kind of controlled intensity that made my knees weak. It wasn't gentle, wasn't tentative, was nothing like the careful kisses I'd exchanged with Gerald in our 8 years together. This was a claiming, a challenge, a conversation conducted entirely without words. When he finally pulled back, his expression had shifted from neutral to something more complex, a mix of surprise and calculation, and something darker I couldn't name. His hand remained at my neck, thumb brushing against my pulse point. "Interesting approach," he said, his voice lower now, rougher. "Do you make a habit of assaulting strangers at parties?" "Only the cold ones," I managed, my voice not quite steady. "I'm raising the temperature, one kiss at a time. It's a public service, really." The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "And you chose me for this public service?" "My friends bet me I wouldn't." The words came out before I could stop them, honesty spilling over the usual filters. "Said you were untouchable. I have a problem with being told what I can't do." "I can see that." His thumb continued its steady rhythm against my pulse, and I wondered if he could feel how fast my heart was racing. "And now that you've won your bet?" "Now I go collect my money and possibly die of embarrassment." I tried to step back, but his hand tightened slightly, keeping me in place. Not painful, not threatening, just insistent. "What's your name?" Diana Parker." I paused. "Well, Diana Parker again. I was Diana Mitchell for a while, but that didn't take." "Divorced?" Something shifted in his expression, became more interested. 3 months? How did you—" "The way you said your name. Like you're still getting used to it belonging to you again." He studied me for another long moment. "I'm Nikolai Reed." "I know. My friends told me. Import-export, or real estate, or something equally vague and possibly nefarious." I repeated Madeline's words and immediately wanted to die. That came out wrong. But instead of being offended, he smiled. Really smiled. Not just that twitch at the corner of his mouth, but something genuine that transformed his entire face, made him look younger, and infinitely more dangerous. "Possibly nefarious," he repeated. "I like your friends already. Are they watching us now? Probably placing bets on whether you're going to have me thrown out." "I don't throw people out at parties," he said. "I have people for that. But you're safe, Diana Parker. At least for now." He released my neck finally, but his gaze remained fixed on mine. "Would you like a drink? Actual conversation? Or do you prefer to make your dramatic exit while you're ahead?" Every instinct I'd developed over 8 years with Gerald screamed at me to leave, to take my victory and escape before I revealed too much, before I got in too deep, before I gave someone else the power to make me feel small. But that reckless spark was still burning, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt genuinely alive. "Conversation," I heard myself say, "but I warn you, I'm newly single and probably terrible at it. I spent 8 years with someone who preferred I stay quiet." "Then perhaps it's time you learn to be loud," Nikolai said, and gestured toward a less crowded corner of the penthouse. "After you." As I walked beside him, I caught sight of Charlotte and Madeline across the room, their expressions somewhere between shocked and delighted. I'd won the bet, collected the story, proven I could be reckless. But as Nikolai's hand settled at the small of my back, warm and possessive and entirely unexpected, I had the distinct feeling I'd just started something I had no idea how to finish. And for the first time since my divorce, that uncertainty didn't terrify me. It thrilled me. The corner Nikolai led me to wasn't really a corner at all, but a small alcove with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city sprawling below like a carpet of diamonds. Someone had left 2 chairs and a small table there, probably for guests who needed a break from the party's relentless cheer. He gestured for me to sit, then claimed the chair opposite, arranging himself with that same economical grace I'd noticed earlier. "So," he said, after a waiter had materialized with fresh drinks, whiskey for him, champagne for me. "Tell me about the man who preferred you quiet." "That's a terrible conversation starter," I said, surprised into honesty. "Don't you know you're supposed to ask about my job or hobbies or what I think about the weather?" "I know what I'm supposed to do," he replied. "I'm asking what I want to know. The man who made you forget your own name. Tell me about him." There was something in his voice, in his absolute focus, that made prevarication feel pointless. Gerald had taught me to deflect, to smooth over uncomfortable truths with pleasant lies. But Nikolai was looking at me like he could see through every defense I'd ever constructed, so why bother maintaining them? "Gerald Mitchell," I said, the name tasting like ash. "Married him when I was 24 because he seemed stable, safe. He was an accountant at a firm downtown, wore sensible suits, and had sensible opinions about everything. My parents loved him. But you didn't. I thought I did, at first." I took a sip of champagne, gathering my thoughts. "He was so certain about everything. After growing up with parents who could never decide on anything, that certainty felt like solid ground. It took me years to realize that certainty was just control with better marketing." "What happened?" Nikolai asked, his voice remarkably gentle for someone who looked like he could break me in half without effort. "Nothing dramatic. No affair, no big blow-up fight. Just 8 years of being slowly reduced. He didn't like how I laughed too loudly, so I laughed more quietly. He thought my job as an event planner was frivolous, so I quit and worked for his friend's insurance company instead. He preferred I wear my hair up, so I stopped wearing it down. One day I woke up and realized I didn't recognize the woman in the mirror. I stopped, embarrassed by how much I'd revealed to a complete stranger. But Nikolai just nodded, as if I'd said something profoundly reasonable. And so you left. Eventually, after my best friend sat me down and asked when I'd become such a ghost. I smiled, but it felt wobbly. Charlotte, one of the women who bet against me tonight. She told me I'd disappeared, that the Diana she knew in college would never have tolerated being made so small. She was right. "Good friend," Nikolai observed. "The best. She and Madeline have been trying to resurrect the old Diana ever since, hence tonight's ridiculous stunt." I gestured vaguely between us. "Kissing strange men at parties. Very therapeutic, apparently." "And is it? Therapeutic?" I considered the question seriously. "Ask me in a few hours, after the adrenaline wears off and the mortification sets in." He smiled again, that same transformation of his features. "You're funnier than you think you are." Gerald didn't think so. "Gerald sounds like an idiot," Nikolai said flatly. "A man who tries to shrink his partner isn't strong. He's terrified." The observation landed with unexpected weight. I'd spent so much time analyzing what I'd done wrong, how I'd failed to be enough, that I'd never considered that maybe Gerald's need to control had more to do with his own inadequacies than mine. "Your turn," I said, deflecting. "Tell me about your possibly nefarious business interests." "Import-export," he said, with a faint smile that suggested he was well aware of how suspicious that sounded. "I facilitate the movement of goods across international borders. Some legal, some in what you might call gray areas of legality." My eyes widened. "Are you actually admitting to crime? To a stranger you just met?" "I'm admitting to operating in spaces where the law is more suggestion than mandate," he clarified. "And you don't feel like a stranger, Diana Parker. You feel like someone I should have met years ago." The admission hung in the air between us, vulnerable and unexpected, from a man who seemed to calculate every word before speaking it. "Are you always this honest?" I asked. "Almost never. It's terrible for business." He took a sip of his whiskey, his gaze never leaving mine. "But something about you makes me want to skip the usual games. Maybe it's the way you kissed me without asking permission first. Heat crept up my neck. I should probably apologize for that. Please don't. It was the most interesting thing to happen to me in years. He leaned forward slightly. Tell me something else. Something true. Like what? Something Gerald wouldn't have wanted you to say. The question was a challenge, but also an invitation. I thought about all the small rebellions I'd swallowed over 8 years, all the authentic parts of myself I'd hidden away to keep peace. I hate insurance, I blurted out. Despise it with a burning passion. I worked in that office for 5 years and wanted to scream every single day. But Gerald said event planning wasn't a real career, that I needed something stable and respectable, so I smiled and processed claims and died inside incrementally. And now? Now I'm unemployed and living off my divorce settlement, which turns out isn't nearly as much as I thought, because apparently Gerald was very good at hiding assets. I laughed, but it came out bitter. I should go back to event planning, I suppose. Start over at 32 with nothing to show for a decade of my life except excellent knowledge of insurance policies. Or, Nikolai said slowly, you could do something entirely different, something dangerous. I don't do dangerous, I said automatically, then stopped. Well, except for tonight, apparently. But in general, I'm very risk-averse. That's Gerald talking, not you. The woman who just kissed me to win a bet isn't risk-averse. She's been playing it safe for so long she forgot what taking chances feels like. His eyes held mine, intense and searching. What would you do if you weren't afraid? No one had asked me that in years. Gerald certainly hadn't. He'd asked what was practical, what was sensible, what other people would think. But what I wanted, what thrilled me, what made my heart race, those questions had been deemed irrelevant. I'd travel, I said, the words coming slowly at first, then faster as they built momentum. I'd get on a plane and not plan the whole trip in advance. I'd learn to speak Italian badly and eat pasta in Rome and buy shoes I can't afford in Milan. I'd go to Thailand or Morocco or Argentina and just exist there, without itinerary, without agenda. Then do it. I laughed. With what money? I just told you I'm unemployed. I could help with that. At my skeptical look, he continued. I'm serious. I need someone to coordinate an event. Nothing insurance-related, I promise. 6 weeks from now, a charity gala. Very high profile, very complicated. My usual person quit spectacularly last week. It pays well. You're offering me a job? We just met. I'm offering you an opportunity. Take it or don't. He shrugged, but something in his expression suggested my answer mattered more than he was letting on. Either way, I'm glad you kissed me tonight, Diana Parker. It's been a long time since anyone surprised me. Before I could respond, the lights dimmed, and the crowd began the countdown to midnight. Nikolai stood, offering his hand. Come. We should rejoin the party, or your friends will think I've abducted you. I took his hand, letting him pull me to my feet. We made our way back to the main room as everyone chanted the final seconds of the year. 10, 9, 8. Charlotte and Madeline materialized beside me, their eyes wide with questions I couldn't begin to answer. 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year. The room erupted in cheers, strangers kissing strangers, champagne corks popping like small explosions. Beside me, Nikolai turned, his expression unreadable. Happy New Year, Diana, he said quietly, and kissed me again. This time it was different, not the claiming of our first kiss, but something softer, more deliberate, like he was memorizing the feel of my mouth against his. When he pulled back, he pressed a business card into my palm. Think about the job, he murmured. Call me either way. Then he was gone, disappearing into the crowd with the same quiet efficiency he'd maintained all night, leaving me standing there with my friends and a business card and the distinct feeling that my life had just tilted on its axis. "Oh my God," Madeline breathed. "What just happened?" "I have no idea," I admitted, staring at the card. "Nikolai Reed, a phone number, nothing else." "He kissed you again," Charlotte said. "At midnight. That's not just a kiss, that's a statement." "A statement of what?" "Interest. Serious interest." Madeline grabbed my shoulders. "Diana Parker, you just caught the attention of the most notorious bachelor in the city. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Won $300? I tried, but my voice shook slightly. "You've done a lot more than that," Charlotte said, something like concern crossing her face. "Nikolai Reed isn't just cold, Di. He's dangerous. People whisper about him, about what he's involved in, who he knows. Are you sure you want to get mixed up in whatever this is?" I looked at the card again, at the neat black letters of his name. Everything Charlotte said made sense. I should thank him for the drink and the conversation, and let this become nothing more than a story I told at parties. The safe choice, the sensible choice, the Gerald choice. "No," I said slowly. "I'm not sure. But for the first time in 8 years, I think I want to find out what happens if I'm not sure, and do it anyway." Charlotte and Madeline exchanged a look I couldn't quite read. Then Madeline grinned and raised her champagne glass. "To Diana Parker, newly divorced, newly reckless, and possibly newly insane. May this year be considerably more interesting than the last." We clinked glasses, and as the champagne bubbles danced on my tongue, I caught myself smiling. Really smiling, not the careful, controlled expression I'd perfected during my marriage, but something wide and genuine and terrified and exhilarated all at once. I had no idea what I was doing. No idea if calling Nikolai Reed was brilliant or catastrophic, if I was finally waking up or walking into a new kind of cage. But as I tucked his card into my purse and let my friends pull me into the celebration, I realized I didn't care. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I wanted to know what happened next. I waited 3 days before calling, which felt like a reasonable amount of time to not seem desperate, while also not seeming disinterested. Gerald would have made a spreadsheet about it, calculating optimal contact timing based on perceived social conventions and game theory. The thought made me pick up the phone and dial before I could second-guess myself further. Nikolai answered on the second ring. "Diana Parker." Not a question, a statement. He'd saved my number. How did you know it was me? Who else would hesitate for exactly 8 seconds before committing to the call? There was humor in his voice, warm and unexpected. "I've been waiting for you to find your courage." "That's presumptuous. Maybe I wasn't going to call at all." "But you did." I could hear the smile now. "So let's not pretend you were doing anything other than overthinking this for 3 days. Coffee? Is that how you conduct all your business negotiations? One-word propositions?" "This isn't business," he said. "Coffee. Today. 1 hour. There's a place called Meridian on 5th Street. Meet me there." He hung up before I could agree or refuse, which should have annoyed me but instead made me laugh. Gerald had never been that decisive about anything. Always hedging, always leaving himself escape routes. Nikolai just made declarations and expected the world to rearrange itself accordingly. I spent 45 minutes changing outfits, which was ridiculous for coffee. But every choice felt weighted with meaning. Too casual suggested I didn't care. Too formal suggested I cared too much. I finally settled on jeans and a soft gray sweater that Charlotte had once told me made my eyes look enormous, then immediately questioned that choice because who tries to make their eyes look enormous for coffee? "You're insane," I told my reflection. "This is coffee, with a possibly criminal businessman, about a job you probably don't want. Get a grip." My reflection looked back at me, nervous and excited and not quite steady, and for the first time since my divorce, I liked what I saw. Meridian turned out to be the kind of place that served coffee in handmade ceramic mugs and had poetry printed on the paper napkins. Nikolai was already there, sitting at a corner table with his back to the wall, a position that gave him clear sight lines to both the entrance and the service counter. I noticed that. Noticed how his eyes tracked my approach with that same intense focus, like I was the only thing in the room worth watching. "You came," he said, as I slid into the chair across from him. "You didn't give me much choice. That was less an invitation and more a summons. Would you have come if I'd asked nicely? Probably not. I would have talked myself out of it. Then I saved us both time." He pushed a mug toward me. "Black coffee, no sugar. You strike me as someone who takes things straight." "That's terrifyingly accurate. How did you kissed me without small talk or warm-up. You're not someone who needs things sweetened." He leaned back, studying me. "So, let's get the obvious question out of the way. Why did you call?" "You offered me a job." "I offered you an opportunity. There's a difference." His gaze didn't waver. "And you didn't call about the job. You called because you've spent 3 days thinking about New Year's Eve, about kissing a stranger, about feeling something other than numb for the first time in years. Yes?" I should have been offended by his presumption, but he wasn't wrong. "You're very sure of yourself." "I'm sure of you," he corrected. "You're 32, recently divorced from a man who spent 8 years making you small, currently unemployed, and standing at the edge of a cliff wondering if you have the courage to jump. I'm not offering you safety, Diana. I'm offering you the fall." My heart hammered against my ribs. That's either the most romantic or most threatening thing anyone's ever said to me. It's honest. He took a sip of his own coffee, black like mine. "The job is real. A charity gala, 6 weeks out, high-profile guests, complex logistics. My previous coordinator left in spectacular fashion, and I need someone competent to salvage the situation. But that's not really why we're here." "Then why are we here?" "Because I haven't stopped thinking about you. Because you're the first woman in years who's looked at me like I'm a man instead of a bank account or a trophy or a means to an end. Because when you kissed me, you weren't trying to gain something. You were trying to prove something to yourself." He paused. "And because I think you feel the same way." Silence stretched between us, heavy with things neither of us was quite ready to say. He was right. I had thought about New Year's Eve constantly, about the way his hand had felt at my neck, about how alive I'd felt standing in that alcove talking to a dangerous stranger. "I don't do this," I finally said. "I don't meet strange men for coffee. I don't kiss people I don't know. I'm not spontaneous or reckless or any of the things you seem to think I am." "You were those things once," Nikolai said quietly. "Before Gerald. You're just remembering how. And what makes you such an expert on who I was? Because I know what it's like to forget yourself. To spend so long being what others need that you lose track of what you want." Something vulnerable flickered across his face, there and gone so quickly I almost missed it. "I'm 41 years old, Diana. I've built an empire on being cold and calculating and impenetrable. And then you walked up to me at a party and kissed me. And for the first time in 20 years, I felt surprised. That's rare. That's valuable. That's worth pursuing." "This is crazy," I said, but I was smiling. "We don't know each other. You could be a serial killer for all I know. I could be, but I'm not." He reached across the table, his hand covering mine. "Take the job. Work with me for 6 weeks. Get to know me. Let me get to know you. If at the end you want to walk away, I won't stop you. But give us both the chance to see what this could be." I looked down at his hand on mine, at the way my smaller fingers disappeared beneath his palm. Everything about this was a terrible idea. Charlotte's warnings echoed in my head. My own instincts screamed caution. But something else, something that had been sleeping for 8 years, whispered yes. "I'll take the job," I heard myself say. "But that's all I'm committing to. The rest we'll see." "The rest we'll see," Nikolai agreed, but his smile suggested he considered that as good as a yes to everything. Over the next hour, he outlined the scope of the gala. 500 guests, silent auction, seated dinner, entertainment. The kind of event I'd planned dozens of times before, but with budgets I'd only dreamed about, and stakes that went far beyond making sure the centerpieces matched the invitations. "The guest list is complicated," Nikolai said, sliding a folder across the table. "Many of my associates prefer discretion. We'll need separate entrances, private security, careful seating arrangements to avoid conflicts." "Conflicts like what?" "Like businesses that compete with each other, family members who haven't spoken in years, law enforcement officials who'd rather not be photographed with certain other attendees." His expression remained neutral. "I told you my business operates in gray areas. This event exists in those same spaces." "Am I going to get arrested for organizing this?" "No, but you might see things that raise questions. I need to know you can be discreet." I thought about Gerald, about 8 years of keeping his secrets, smoothing over his mistakes, presenting a perfect facade to the world. I'd hated it then, hated how he'd made his problems mine. But this felt different. Nikolai wasn't asking me to make myself smaller to accommodate him. He was asking me to step into something larger, something complex and morally ambiguous, and entirely outside my safe, sensible life. "I can be discreet," I said. "Good." He stood, offering his hand. "Come, I'll show you the venue." The venue turned out to be a historic mansion on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place that appeared in architectural magazines and charged 5 figures just to walk through the door. As we toured the space, Nikolai's phone rang constantly. He'd answer in Russian, or what sounded like Italian, his tone shifting from charming to cold, to commanding, depending on the caller. I watched him navigate these conversations with the same controlled intensity he'd shown at the party. And something occurred to me. This man, this dangerous, powerful, possibly criminal man, was letting me see these interactions, not hiding them or pretending to be something he wasn't. The honesty felt like a gift, even if the truth was complicated. "Question," I said as we stood in the mansion's ballroom, sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. "Why me? You must know a dozen professional event planners with actual credentials and references." "I know hundreds," Nikolai said, "but they see me as a client, a job. You see me as a man. That's worth more than any credential. I barely know you." "You know I'm possibly nefarious," he said, his mouth quirking. "You know I prefer my coffee black and my business associates at separate tables. You know I haven't stopped thinking about you since you kissed me without permission." He moved closer, his hand coming to rest at my waist. "What else do you need to know?" "Everything," I whispered, acutely aware of how little space remained between us. "Your favorite color, what you read, where you grew up, what makes you laugh, what keeps you up at night." "Blue, military history, Moscow, but I left at 16. Very little makes me laugh, which is why your jokes are so valuable. And what keeps me up at night." He leaned down, his mouth close to my ear. "Lately it's been thoughts of you. I should have stepped back, should have maintained professional distance, should have done any number of sensible things. Instead, I turned my head slightly, bringing our mouths within inches of each other. "This is a terrible idea," I breathed. "The best ones usually are," Nikolai replied, and kissed me. This kiss was different from the ones at the party. Not performative, not to prove a point, but slow and deliberate and searching. His hands framed my face, thumbs brushing against my cheekbones, and I felt myself melting into him in a way I hadn't with anyone. Not even in the early days with Gerald, when I'd still thought love meant safety. This didn't feel safe. It felt like standing at the edge of something vast and unknowable, like the moment before a storm breaks, when the air goes electric and dangerous. And God help me. I wanted it. Wanted him. Wanted whatever chaos and complexity came with letting this stranger become something more. When we finally broke apart, both breathing harder, Nikolai rested his forehead against mine. "I should be more careful with you," he said quietly. "You deserve someone uncomplicated, someone safe." "I had safe," I replied. "It made me miserable. Maybe it's time to try dangerous." His smile was brilliant and slightly sad. "Then dangerous you shall have, starting with dinner, tonight. Somewhere we can talk properly." "Dinner feels very date-like." "That's because it is a date," Nikolai said, already pulling out his phone to make arrangements. 7 o'clock. I'll send a car. I have a car. I can drive myself." "I know you can, but I want to take care of you. Let me." And there it was. The thing Gerald had twisted, taking care of someone, making it about control instead of affection. But when Nikolai said it, it felt different. Like he was offering to carry weight I'd been shouldering alone, not trying to pin me under it. "Okay," I agreed. 7 o'clock. He kissed me again, quick and possessive, then stepped back. "Wear something that makes you feel powerful. We're going somewhere that requires confidence." After he left, I stood alone in that vast ballroom, sunlight warming my skin, and wondered what the hell I'd just gotten myself into. 3 days ago, I'd been a recently divorced woman whose biggest rebellion was wearing jeans to the grocery store. Now I was planning galas for possibly criminal businessmen and agreeing to dates with dangerous strangers who kissed like they were claiming territory. I pulled out my phone and texted Charlotte. I took the job, and maybe some other things too. Her response was immediate. "Diana Parker, what are you doing?" I looked around the beautiful, opulent ballroom, at the life I was stepping into, at the door through which Nikolai had just disappeared. "I have absolutely no idea," I typed back. "But I think I like it." The dress hanging in my closet was red. Not subtle burgundy or tasteful wine, but lipstick red, the kind that announced itself when you entered a room. Charlotte had insisted I buy it months ago, swearing I'd need it someday for something important. At the time, I'd thought she was being optimistic. Now, staring at it at 6:30 with the car arriving in 30 minutes, I realized she'd been prescient. "Wear something that makes you feel powerful," Nikolai had said. This dress was power. It was also terrifying, with a neckline that suggested rather than revealed, and fabric that skimmed my body like a second skin. The Diana who'd been married to Gerald would never have worn this dress. She'd have chosen something more appropriate, more modest, more designed to fade into the background. I put it on. The car arrived exactly at 7, a sleek black sedan driven by a man who introduced himself as Sawyer and treated me with the kind of deference usually reserved for visiting dignitaries. He opened doors, adjusted the seat, and somehow made the 40-minute drive through the city feel like being transported to another world entirely. We pulled up to a building I recognized from magazines, Aurelius, one of those restaurants where reservations required 6 months of notice and connections I didn't have. The kind of place Gerald had always said was too pretentious for people like us, which I now understood meant he felt inadequate and preferred I feel inadequate alongside him. Nikolai was waiting at a private table in a room with walls of wine bottles and a ceiling painted with murals of Italian countryside. He stood when I entered, and something shifted in his expression when he saw the red dress. "Devastating," he said simply. "Absolutely devastating." "I wasn't sure," I admitted. "It's a lot." "It's perfect. You're perfect." He held my chair, his hand lingering briefly on my shoulder before he took his own seat across from me. How was the drive? Unnecessary and extravagant, I said. I really could have driven myself. But then I wouldn't have been able to make sure you arrived safely, and I wouldn't have had an excuse to show off. His smile was self-aware, almost sheepish. I'm not used to wanting to impress people. It makes me do ridiculous things like sending cars and securing impossible reservations. A waiter appeared with a wine list that looked like an ancient manuscript. Nikolai ordered in flawless Italian, something I'd never heard before, but that made my stomach flutter pleasantly. When the waiter left, I leaned forward. Okay, I need to know things. Real things. You said you left Moscow at 16. Why? Straight to the heart of it, he observed. No small talk, no weather commentary. We're past small talk. You kissed me in a ballroom this afternoon. That pretty much obliterates the need for discussing weather patterns. He laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his entire face. My father was involved in certain businesses that made staying in Russia complicated. When I was 16, he made arrangements for me to leave, to start over somewhere he couldn't reach. I ended up here with nothing but a fake passport and a bag of cash that ran out after 3 months. And then I learned that the skills my father had taught me, negotiation, leverage, reading people, translated well to American business, just in different contexts. He took a sip of the wine that had been poured. I started small, import-export, exactly as vague as your friend suggested. Moved into real estate, property management, private security, built something legitimate around the edges of something less so. How much less so? That depends on your definition of legitimate, Nikolai said carefully. I don't deal drugs. I don't traffic people. I don't finance terrorism or run protection rackets. But I do facilitate transactions that happen in legal gray areas. I provide services to people who need discretion. I know judges and police chiefs and senators. And yes, I know them because I've made myself useful to them in ways they'd rather not discuss publicly. The honesty was bracing. Most people in his position would have deflected, softened the truth, made themselves sound more legitimate than they were. But Nikolai just laid it out, giving me the choice of what to do with the information. Should I be scared? I asked. Of me? No, I would never hurt you, Diana. That's not conditional or situational. It's absolute. His gaze held mine. But should you be aware that knowing me comes with complications? Yes. My world isn't simple. The people I associate with aren't all good, and there are risks that come with being close to me. Like what? Like rival businessmen who might see you as leverage. Like law enforcement, who might want to use you to get to me. Like social circles that will judge you for associating with someone like me. He paused. I'm giving you an exit, Diana. You can walk away now, take a generous consulting fee for the gala planning, and we'll part as friendly acquaintances. No hard feelings, no complications. I should have taken it. Everything about this was a red flag wrapped in a warning sign. But as I sat there in my red dress that made me feel powerful, looking at this dangerous man who'd been nothing but honest with me, I realized I didn't want the exit. What if I don't want to walk away? Something fierce and pleased flashed in his eyes. Then we order dinner, and I tell you more stories, and we see where this goes. But I need you to understand what you're choosing. I'm choosing possibility, I said. I'm choosing feeling something other than numb. I'm choosing you, Nikolai Reed, complications and all. For now. And we'll see what happens. For now is enough, he said quietly. More than enough. Dinner lasted 3 hours. We talked about everything. My childhood in a suburb where everyone knew everyone's business. His memories of Moscow winters and leaving everything familiar behind. My failed marriage and the slow erosion of self that came with it. his relationships, brief and ultimately unsatisfying, with women who wanted the power he represented, but not the man behind it. I haven't had a serious relationship in 15 years, Nikolai admitted over dessert. Some elaborate creation involving chocolate and gold leaf that cost more than my monthly utilities. Not since I realized that anyone who got close did so for strategic reasons. My money, my connections, my influence. Never just me. That's incredibly lonely. It is, but it's also safe. You can't be betrayed by people you never trust. He reached across the table, his fingers threading through mine. And then you kissed me at a party, and suddenly safe feels considerably less important than taking a chance on something real. We barely know each other, I protested, even as my fingers tightened around his. This could be infatuation, chemistry, the novelty of someone new. It could be, he agreed, or it could be something more. The only way to find out is to keep going. When dinner ended, Sawyer was waiting outside. But instead of taking me home, Nikolai asked, "Would you like to see where I live? No expectations, no pressure. I just want to show you more of who I am." I should have said no, should have maintained boundaries, kept things slow, protected myself from moving too fast. But I was so tired of should, tired of being careful, tired of letting fear dictate my choices. "Yes," I said. His home was a penthouse overlooking the river, all glass walls and minimalist furniture that probably cost more than my car. But what struck me wasn't the obvious wealth. It was the books, shelves and shelves of them, military history like he'd said, but also poetry and philosophy, and novels with worn spines that suggested they'd been read multiple times. "I don't sleep much," Nikolai explained, noticing where my attention had gone. "Reading helps pass the time." Most people find that strange. "Gerald refused to have books in the house," I said. "Said they collected dust and made rooms look cluttered." I kept mine in boxes in the garage. Something dangerous crossed Nikolai's face. "Your ex-husband is a fool. Books are how we make sense of the world, how we find beauty in chaos. Anyone who would deny you that isn't someone worth your time." He showed me the rest of the penthouse. A kitchen he rarely used because he was rarely home. A gym where he boxed out his frustrations. A bedroom that was sparse and functional. No personal touches except for a photograph on the nightstand. A woman I didn't recognize, older, with kind eyes. "My mother," he said when he saw me looking. "She died before I left Russia. This is the only picture I managed to bring with me." The vulnerability in that admission, this powerful, dangerous man reduced to a teenage boy carrying one photograph across the world, made my chest ache. "I'm sorry," I said inadequately. It was a long time ago. But his voice was rough. "She would have liked you, I think. You have her same stubborn streak, her refusal to be diminished." We ended up on the balcony, the city spread below us like jewelry on velvet. Neither of us quite ready for the night to end. Nikolai poured vodka, Russian, ice cold, and we stood there in comfortable silence for long minutes. "I should go home," I said eventually. "It's late." "You should," Nikolai agreed, but made no move to call Sawyer. "Diana, I need to tell you something. Something important." Dread coiled in my stomach. "What?" "I'm not good at this. At relationships, at emotional intimacy. At any of the things that make connections work. I'm going to disappoint you. I'm going to be absent when you need me present. Cold when you need warmth. Closed off when you need vulnerability. It's who I am. Who I've had to be to survive." He turned to face me fully. "But I want to try. With you. I want to be better than I've been. I'm just not sure I know how." The honesty, raw and undefended, made something inside me crack open. I reached up, my palm against his cheek, feeling the slight roughness of stubble. "Then we'll figure it out together," I said. I'm not exactly an expert in healthy relationships myself, but maybe two broken people can find a way to be whole together. Maybe that's enough. Maybe it is, Nikolai breathed and kissed me. This kiss was different from all the others. Not performative or exploratory or searching, but claiming. His hands slid into my hair, anchoring me to him, and I pressed closer, feeling the solid warmth of him through the thin fabric of my red dress. When his mouth moved to my neck, I gasped, tilting my head to give him better access. "Stay," he murmured against my skin. "Please, just to sleep. I just want you here." Every instinct I'd developed over 8 years with Gerald screamed warnings. Moving too fast, getting too close, losing myself in someone else's gravity. But this didn't feel like losing myself. It felt like finding parts of me I'd forgotten existed. "Okay," I whispered. "I'll stay." I woke in Nikolai's bed, wearing one of his shirts, sunlight streaming through those vast windows, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar weight of expensive linens and the scent of cedar and bergamot that clung to everything he owned. He wasn't beside me, but I could hear water running in the bathroom, the domestic intimacy of it making my stomach flip pleasantly. We hadn't done anything more than kiss and fall asleep, tangled together, his arms solid around my waist, my back pressed against his chest. It had been the most restful sleep I'd had in months, possibly years. No anxiety, no second-guessing, just the simple comfort of being held by someone who wanted me there. The water shut off. Nikolai emerged from the bathroom wearing only a towel slung low on his hips, water droplets still clinging to his shoulders. I tried very hard not to stare at the precise architecture of his body, the defined muscles that suggested he spent serious time in that gym, the faint scars that interrupted otherwise smooth skin. "Good morning," he said, his voice still rough with sleep. "Coffee? Please." I sat up, suddenly self-conscious in his shirt. I should probably go home, get changed. My friends are going to have questions. Probably. He didn't sound concerned as he pulled on jeans and a t-shirt, moving with unself-conscious ease. But first, coffee and breakfast. I had groceries delivered an hour ago. You had groceries delivered? I told you I don't cook, but I had my assistant arrange for ingredients and very detailed instructions. I'm told I can make edible scrambled eggs if I follow directions exactly. His smile was self-deprecating. I want to take care of you, Diana, even if that means learning to use my own kitchen. Something in my chest softened dangerously. Gerald had never learned to cook in 8 years of marriage, had considered it my job to feed us both. But here was Nikolai Reed, possibly criminal businessman, admitting he'd had ingredients delivered and instructions printed so he could make me breakfast. "Okay," I said. "Coffee and eggs, but I'm supervising. Those instructions might be optimistic about your abilities." We ended up standing side by side in his pristine kitchen, me reading instructions aloud while he wielded a spatula with intense concentration, usually reserved for international negotiations. The eggs turned out slightly rubbery but edible, and the coffee was perfect, strong, and black, the way we both preferred it. "This is nice," I said, surprising myself with the admission. "Domestic. Too domestic?" There was uncertainty in his voice. "I don't want to presume things, Diana. We've known each other less than a week. 5 days," I corrected. "But it feels longer somehow, like I've known you in another life, or something equally ridiculous." "Not ridiculous." He set down his fork, reaching across to take my hand. "I feel the same way, like I've been waiting for you without realizing it." Before I could respond, his phone rang. He glanced at it, and something in his expression shuddered. "I need to take this. Business. Give me 5 minutes?" He disappeared into his study, and I heard the low murmur of Russian through the door. I cleaned up breakfast, trying not to feel like I was intruding on his space, trying not to notice how easily I'd fallen into this pattern of casual intimacy with someone who remained, in many ways, a stranger. When he emerged 10 minutes later, the warmth from earlier had been replaced by something harder, more remote. The businessman instead of the man who'd burned eggs trying to impress me. "Problem?" I asked. "Nothing I can't handle. But I need to go take care of something." He crossed to me, his hands framing my face. "Sawyer will take you home. Are you free tonight? I'd like to see you again." I think I could probably arrange that. Good. He kissed me, thorough and possessive, then stepped back. "I'm going to disappoint you, Diana. Probably sooner rather than later. Just remember that when I do, it's because I'm broken in ways I'm still learning to articulate, not because you're not enough." The preemptive apology should have worried me more than it did. But I just nodded, kissed him again, and let Sawyer drive me home. The next 3 weeks blurred together in a pattern of work and stolen time. I threw myself into planning the gala, coordinating with vendors and security, and the impossibly complicated guest list Nikolai had provided. During the day, I was all business, professional, and competent, proving I deserved the absurd amount of money he was paying me. At night, I was something else entirely. We had dinner most evenings, sometimes at restaurants so exclusive they didn't have signs, sometimes in his penthouse with takeout containers and documentaries about Russian history. We talked about everything and nothing. He told me about building his empire, about the compromises he'd made and the lines he'd refused to cross. I told him about my marriage, about the slow suffocation of being loved wrong, about remembering who I used to be before Gerald. And we learned each other. I learned he took his coffee scalding hot, but couldn't handle spicy food. That he boxed when stressed, and read poetry when he couldn't sleep. That he had a scar on his shoulder from a knife fight at 17, and another on his ribs from a car accident at 25. That he spoke 5 languages, but still thought in Russian when he was tired. He learned I talked too much when nervous and went silent when truly upset. That I organized my books by color instead of author and had strong opinions about the proper way to fold towels. That I cried at commercials with dogs but stayed dry-eyed through actual sad movies. That I'd wanted to be a writer once, but had let Gerald convince me it was impractical. "You should write," Nikolai said one night as we lay tangled in his bed. Properly this time, my head on his chest, his fingers tracing idle patterns on my back. "You have stories. Tell them." "It's too late. I'm 32. I was 30 when I made my first million. 35 when I realized I'd built something that mattered. It's never too late to become who you were supposed to be, but even as things deepened between us, I noticed the absences. The phone calls he'd take in another room. The meetings he couldn't explain. The nights when he'd disappear for hours and return with tension radiating off him like heat. I didn't ask. Partly because I'd agreed to discretion, but mostly because I was afraid of what I'd learn. Charlotte and Madeline noticed the change in me. We met for lunch the 3rd week, and they exchanged concerned looks over their salads as I talked about the gala preparations. "You're glowing," Madeline said carefully, in a scary way, like you're either deliriously happy or in complete denial about something terrible. "Maybe both," I admitted. "Is that possible?" "With Nikolai Reed?" Charlotte set down her fork. "Diana, we need to talk about this, about him. I've been doing some research." "I don't want to know," I said immediately. "Whatever you found, I don't want to know. You need to know. He's not just a businessman with gray area dealings, Di. There are rumors, serious ones, about connections to organized crime, about people who've crossed him and disappeared, about—" "Stop." My voice came out sharper than intended. "He's been nothing but honest with me. He told me his business isn't entirely legitimate. I know what I'm getting into." "Do you?" Madeline's voice was gentle but insistent. Because from where I'm sitting, you're falling for someone who could be genuinely dangerous. And I'm not talking about emotionally dangerous. I'm talking about people end up dead dangerous. He would never hurt me. That's what people always say, right before they get hurt. Charlotte reached across the table, squeezing my hand. We love you, Diana. We just don't want to watch you trade one bad situation for another. Their concern was valid. I knew that objectively. But subjectively, in the part of my heart that had come alive these past 3 weeks, I trusted Nikolai in a way I'd never trusted Gerald. Whatever darkness existed in his world, he'd kept me separate from it, protected from it. Or so I thought, until Gerald showed up. He appeared at my apartment on a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks and 4 days after New Year's Eve, looking exactly as he had when I'd left him. Medium height, medium build, medium everything. The human equivalent of beige wallpaper. Diana, he said when I opened the door, his voice carrying that familiar note of disappointed patience. We need to talk. We have lawyers for that, Gerald. I'm not supposed to communicate with you directly. This isn't about the divorce. He pushed past me into the apartment, his gaze cataloging everything with obvious judgment. Nice place. Must have cost you most of your settlement. Not smart, Diana. You should have been more frugal. The criticism was automatic. So familiar I almost didn't notice it. Almost. What do you want? I want to discuss your poor choices. Specifically, Nikolai Reed. He turned to face me, and there was something in his expression I'd never seen before. Genuine concern mixed with something uglier. Do you have any idea who you're involved with? Someone who's none of your business. He's dangerous, Diana. Not just morally questionable, but actually dangerous. I've done research. His import business is a front for smuggling. His real estate holdings are money laundering operations. He has connections to Russian organized crime, to people who kill for a living. You're being dramatic. I'm being realistic, which is more than I can say for you. Gerald's voice rose slightly. You're throwing away your reputation, your safety, possibly your life. For what? Great sex with a criminal? That's enough, I said coldly. You need to leave. Not until you understand what's at stake. If you continue this relationship, there will be consequences. For you, for him, for everyone involved. I won't stand by and watch you destroy yourself. You don't get a vote anymore, Gerald. We're divorced. My choices are mine. Then make better ones. He moved toward the door, then paused. I'm filing an appeal on the settlement, claiming you misrepresented assets. Unless you end things with Reed and behave more appropriately for a recently divorced woman, I'll make the process as difficult and expensive as possible. Fear shot through me, but I kept my voice level. That's blackmail. That's protection. From yourself. He opened the door. Think about it, Diana. Think about what matters more. Your fantasy with a criminal or your future. After he left, I stood frozen in my living room, his words echoing in my skull. Part of me knew he was trying to manipulate me, using fear the same way he'd used criticism throughout our marriage. But another part, the part that remembered Charlotte's concerns and Madeline's warnings, wondered if maybe everyone else could see something I was refusing to acknowledge. I didn't tell Nikolai about Gerald's visit. Told myself it was because I could handle it. Because I didn't want to worry him. Because it was my problem to solve. But deep down, I knew I was afraid. Afraid of what Nikolai might do if he knew Gerald was threatening me. Afraid of confirming that the darkness everyone warned about was real. The gala was 2 weeks away. I threw myself into final preparations, using work as a shield against thinking too hard about anything else. But even as I confirmed flower arrangements and seating charts, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was building toward a breaking point. I just didn't know what would break when it finally arrived. The gala was perfect. I'd made sure of that, obsessing over every detail until even I had to admit there was nothing left to worry about. 500 guests in designer gowns and custom tuxedos, a silent auction that raised obscene amounts of money for whatever charity Nikolai had chosen, entertainment sophisticated enough to impress even the most jaded billionaire. I stood at the edge of the ballroom in a midnight blue dress that Nikolai had insisted on buying, watching the culmination of 6 weeks of work, and felt absolutely nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, just a hollow numbness that had been spreading since Gerald's visit 2 weeks ago. Nikolai appeared at my elbow, devastatingly handsome in black tie, his hand warm at the small of my back. "It's extraordinary, Diana. You're extraordinary." "It's just good planning," I said, forcing a smile. His eyes narrowed slightly. "You've been distant this week. What's wrong?" "Nothing. Just tired. The final push always exhausts me." It was a lie. I'd been distant because I was terrified. Gerald had started the appeal process, had hired a vicious lawyer who was making my life miserable with depositions and document requests. But more than that, I'd started seeing things. The way people at the gala deferred to Nikolai with a kind of fear that went beyond respect. The whispered conversations that stopped when I approached. The man Sawyer had escorted out earlier, his face bruised, walking like he'd been broken in precise, deliberate ways. "Diana." Nikolai turned me to face him fully. "Talk to me. Whatever it is, we can fix it." "Can we?" The words came out sharper than intended. "Can you fix everything, Nikolai? Including the fact that everyone here is terrified of you? Including whatever happened to that man earlier? Including Ms. Parker?" A woman's voice interrupted. I turned to find Gerald's lawyer, a shark in pearls, smiling with too many teeth. "Wonderful event. I'm Helen Morris. I've been trying to reach you about your deposition next week." Nikolai's expression went very still. "Deposition?" "For Ms. Parker's divorce proceedings. Her ex-husband is appealing the settlement. We have some questions about her current financial situation and living arrangements." Helen's smile widened. "I'm sure you understand how important full disclosure is in these matters." "Get away from her," Nikolai said, his voice soft and absolutely terrifying. "Now." Helen paled but held her ground. "Ms. Parker, the deposition is mandatory. Friday at 9, my office." She pressed a card into my hand and fled. Nikolai turned to me, and I saw the exact moment he understood. "Your ex-husband is threatening you. How long has this been going on?" 2 weeks. It's not important." "Not important?" His voice rose slightly, enough that nearby guests turned to look. He pulled me toward a private alcove, away from curious eyes. "Someone is blackmailing you, using our relationship as leverage, and you didn't think to mention it?" "I can handle Gerald." "Clearly you can't, or we wouldn't be having this conversation." Anger crackled off him like electricity. "What exactly has he threatened?" "It doesn't matter. I'll figure it out." "It matters to me. Tell me what he said, Diana. All of it." The combination of anger and genuine concern in his voice broke something inside me. "He said you're dangerous, that your business is a front for smuggling and money laundering, that you have connections to Russian organized crime, that people who cross you disappear. He said if I didn't end things with you, he'd make the divorce appeal as difficult and expensive as possible." Silence fell between us, heavy with things neither of us had said before. "Is he right?" I whispered. "About you? About what you do?" Nikolai's jaw tightened. "Some of it. Not all. My business exists in spaces between legal and illegal, Diana. You knew that. But I'm not a monster. I don't hurt innocent people. I don't kill for sport or profit. I protect what's mine and eliminate threats to my interests. That's all." "That's all?" I laughed, but it came out broken. You eliminate threats. Do you hear yourself? You're talking about ending people's lives like it's a business decision. Because sometimes it is. That's my world, Diana. The world you said you could accept. I said I could accept gray areas, not eliminating threats. Not. I gestured helplessly at the ballroom, at the beautiful, terrified people. Not all of this. Then what do you want from me? Frustration edged his voice. I've been honest with you. More honest than I've been with anyone in 20 years. I've shown you who I am. If that's not enough, if you need me to be something safer, something cleaner, then tell me now so we can end this before someone gets hurt. Someone's already hurt, I said quietly. I'm hurt. Because I fell for you, Nikolai. Fell hard and fast and completely. And now I'm realizing I fell for an idea of you, not the reality. The reality is that you're exactly what Gerald said. Dangerous, and I can't do this. Something crumbled in his expression. Diana, I need space, time to think. The gala is done. My job is finished. I need to go. I walked away before he could respond, before I could see what my words had done to him, before I could change my mind. Collected my coat from the check, called a car, left my own event, like a ghost fading into darkness. The next 6 months were the longest of my life. I didn't take Nikolai's calls, blocked his number after the first 100 attempts, returned the absurd paycheck he'd given me for the gala with a note saying I couldn't accept money from him. Started over with exactly nothing except the clothes I owned and the small apartment I could barely afford. Gerald won his appeal. Not because he had a legitimate case, but because I couldn't afford to fight it. Gave back most of my settlement just to end the legal nightmare. Got a job with a small event planning company, working twice as hard for a fraction of what Nikolai had paid me, trying to rebuild some version of the life I'd had before New Year's Eve. Charlotte and Madeline tried to be supportive, but I could see the relief in their eyes. Their Diana was back, the safe one who made sensible choices and didn't kiss dangerous strangers at parties. But that Diana felt like a costume I was wearing badly. Because even as I went through the motions of normal life, I couldn't stop thinking about him. About the way he'd held me in his penthouse. About the vulnerability in his voice when he'd admitted he was broken. About the fact that I'd left him without giving him a chance to explain, to change, to be better. I'd done exactly what Gerald had done to me. Demanded someone become smaller to make me comfortable. The realization hit me 6 months to the day after the gala. I was coordinating a corporate retreat, mindless work that paid bills but crushed my soul, when my phone rang from an unknown number. Diana Parker? A woman's voice, professional, careful. Speaking. This is Katerina Volkov. I work for Nikolai Reed. I'm calling to inform you that Mr. Reed has requested your presence at his office tomorrow at 10 a.m. He has a business proposition that may interest you. My heart stuttered. I don't think that's a good idea. Mr. Reed anticipated you might say that. He asked me to tell you that he's spent the last 6 months becoming someone worthy of a second chance. He'd like the opportunity to prove it. No expectations, no pressure. Just a conversation. I should have said no. Should have protected myself. Maintained boundaries. Refused to be drawn back into his gravity. But that reckless spark, the one that had started everything, flickered to life. What time did you say? 10 a.m. I'll send a car. I can drive myself. Mr. Reed was quite insistent about the car. There was a smile in her voice. He said you'd argue, but to send it anyway. Despite everything, I laughed. Fine. 10 a.m. The car arrived at 9:30, giving me no time to change my mind. Sawyer was driving, his familiar face a comfort in the chaos of my nerves. We drove not to Nikolai's office but to the waterfront, to a building under construction that hadn't existed 6 months ago. Nikolai was waiting at the entrance, and my breath caught at the sight of him. Older somehow. Lines around his eyes I didn't remember, but also lighter, like he'd set down weight he'd been carrying. "Diana," he said, my name rough in his mouth. "Thank you for coming. Your assistant was very persuasive. I hired Katerina specifically because she's more diplomatic than I am. Come, let me show you what I've built." He led me through the construction site, explaining as we walked. This building would house his new venture, Reed Import Solutions, legitimate import-export, focusing on ethical sourcing and transparent supply chains. The floors above would be luxury apartments, the revenue funding a nonprofit that provided job training for formerly incarcerated individuals. "I spent 6 months dismantling everything questionable in my empire," Nikolai said as we stood in what would eventually be his office, windows overlooking the river. "Sold off the properties that were money laundering fronts, ended partnerships with anyone involved in organized crime. Used my connections not to facilitate gray market deals, but to help people transition into legitimate business." "Why?" I whispered. "Because you were right, about all of it." He turned to face me fully. "I was dangerous. I did eliminate threats. I existed in a world where violence was an acceptable solution, and you deserved better. So I became better. You can't just change who you are in 6 months. I didn't change who I am. I changed what I do with who I am. The skills that made me successful in the shadows work just as well in the light. The connections I made with criminals translate to connections with reformers. The same intensity I brought to building an empire I now bring to rebuilding myself." He stepped closer. "I'm not innocent, Diana. I can't erase my past. But I can choose my future. And I choose you. If you'll have me." Tears burned behind my eyes. "You did all this for me?" "I did it for us. For the possibility of us. Because 6 months ago, you kissed me at a party and made me want to be worth your attention. Because you saw something in me that I'd forgotten existed. Because you're the only person who's ever made me want to be better, instead of just more powerful." "I'm sorry," I said, the words tumbling out. "For leaving without giving you a chance to explain. For demanding you change without offering to meet you halfway. For being so scared of getting hurt that I hurt you first. You had every right to be scared. I gave you plenty of reasons." He reached out, his hand cupping my cheek with heartbreaking gentleness. "But if you're willing to try again, I promise I'll spend every day earning your trust. Not with money or power, but with honesty. With showing you who I am now, who I want to be." I leaned into his touch, feeling the familiar spark that had started everything. "What about Gerald? His threats?" "Dealt with." Nikolai's smile was sharp. "Legally, ethically, but permanently. He won't bother you again. And before you ask, no, I didn't hurt him. I simply made it clear that harassing you would have consequences he couldn't afford. You can't just threaten my ex-husband. I didn't threaten him. I had my lawyers explain to his lawyers that any further appeals or legal harassment would result in a very thorough investigation of his finances. Turns out Gerald has been hiding income for years. Amazing what a good forensic accountant can find." His expression softened. "I protected you, Diana, within the boundaries of the law, because that's what you do for people you love." The word hung between us, naked and vulnerable. "You love me?" Desperately, completely, in ways that terrify me because I've never felt this before. His thumb brushed against my cheekbone. "I love you, Diana Parker. I've loved you since you kissed me without permission, since you challenged me in that restaurant, since you wore that red dress and looked at me like I was worth knowing. I love you." "I love you too," I whispered. "Even when I was angry, even when I was scared, I loved you. I never stopped." He kissed me then, and it felt like coming home. Like the 6 months apart had been necessary, had given us both time to become people who could build something real. When we finally broke apart, both breathing harder, he rested his forehead against mine. Move in with me. Not the penthouse, somewhere new, somewhere that's ours. Help me run this company. Use your skills for something that matters. Build a life with me, Diana. A real one, complicated and messy and entirely ours. Every sensible instinct I possessed screamed warnings. This was too fast, too much, too risky. But I was done being sensible, done protecting myself from possibility. Yes, I said. To all of it. Yes. 5 years later, I stood in a different ballroom, at a different gala, wearing a different dress. 38 years old, confident in ways I'd never been in my 20s, watching as Nikolai moved through the crowd with easy authority. He was 47 now, silver threading more obviously through his dark hair, lines deeper around his eyes when he smiled. He was also the most respected businessman in the city. Reed Import Solutions had become a model for ethical commerce. His nonprofit had helped hundreds of formerly incarcerated people find meaningful work. He sat on charitable boards, advised politicians, had become someone people looked to for leadership instead of fearing. But when he found me at the edge of the room, when his hand settled at the small of my back with familiar possessiveness, he was just Nikolai. The man who'd learned to cook for me, who read my terrible first drafts and insisted they were brilliant, who'd proposed 3 times before I finally said yes because I was superstitious about the number 3. Happy anniversary, he murmured against my temple. 6 years since I first saw you in red. 6 years since I won a bet and started a revolution, I corrected. Our revolution. He turned me to face him, unconcerned with the crowd watching. Dance with me. Here? Now? We're supposed to be hosting. We can host while dancing. Come. He pulled me onto the floor, into his arms, moving with practiced ease. Do you remember what you said that first night? That you were raising the temperature 1 kiss at a time? I was trying to be clever and failing spectacularly. You succeeded. You raised my temperature. Made me feel things I'd thought were dead. Made me want to be better. He smiled, the real one that transformed his face. You saved me, Diana Parker. Every day, you save me. We saved each other, I corrected. You taught me to be brave, to take chances, to believe I deserved more than small, safe lives. And look what we built. He gestured to the ballroom, to the people dancing and laughing and celebrating. An empire of light instead of shadow. Together. Together, I agreed, and kissed him in the middle of the dance floor. Later, as we stood on the balcony watching the city lights, he pulled something from his pocket. A small velvet box I recognized from a conversation years ago. I bought this the day you agreed to move in with me, he said, opening it to reveal a ring. Not the engagement ring I wore, but something different. A wide band with an inscription inside. I've been waiting for the right moment to give it to you. I read the inscription, my throat tightening with emotion. For Diana, who kissed me into existence. Because that's what you did. Before you, I was just surviving. Going through motions, playing roles, existing without living. You kissed me that night and woke something I'd buried so deep I'd forgotten it was there. You made me real, Diana. You make me real every day. I slid the ring onto my finger, next to my engagement band and wedding ring, a third promise to add to the others. I love you, I said simply. My dangerous man who learned to be safe. My empire builder who chose light. I love you, he replied. My reckless woman who kissed strangers and changed everything. My revolution. We stood there as the city glittered below. 2 people who'd taken impossible chances and built impossible lives. The bet I'd won that New Year's Eve had cost me $300 and earned me a kingdom. Not the kingdom of Nikolai's wealth or power, but something more valuable. A partnership. A love that had survived distance and doubt and the hard work of becoming better people. I'd bet I could kiss the coldest man at the party. I'd won that bet. But I'd gained something infinitely more precious. I'd gained the warmth that came after, the heat of a love built on honesty and transformation, and the radical choice to be vulnerable with someone worth the risk. And as Nikolai pulled me closer, his warmth solid against the cool night air, I knew with absolute certainty that no bet I'd ever win would matter as much as this one I'd already won. The bet on us, on possibility, on love powerful enough to transform darkness into light.